My daughter-in-law stood at the foot of my hospital bed and told the discharge planner that there was nobody at home to take care of me. I was 6 feet away with my eyes open. I understood every word, and I could not produce a single sound to stop her. That is the part people cannot imagine until it happens to them. So let me put you inside it. The stroke had taken the left side of my brain, in the region that builds words, not the region that understands them. I could hear the discharge planner perfectly. I could read her name badge. I knew that the correct response was "That is not true. I have a nurse coming to the house 4 days a week, and my neighbor across the street has a key." I had the entire sentence assembled and waiting. What came out of my mouth was a sound like a door hinge. Marisa did not look at me. She had learned within about 72 hours that she did not have to. She kept her eyes on the discharge planner and said, in a voice full of concern that anyone would have believed, that the family had discussed it and that the safest thing for Dad was a skilled nursing facility directly from the hospital. Dad. She had never once called me Dad in 11 years of marriage to my son. She started that week, and my son Damon stood next to her and put his hand on my ankle through the blanket and said, "It's for the best, Pop." Before I take you back to how a man ends up in that bed, tell me down in the comments where you are watching from, and answer me this while you are there, because it is the question I have not been able to put down. If you lost the ability to speak tomorrow, is there anyone in your life who would speak for you honestly, without asking what was in it for them? Hit that like button and stay with me, because 11 weeks later I got one word back, and it was the exact word I had needed for 20 years, and never once said. I flew freight for 32 years. I started at a regional in 1979 hauling checks and canceled mail in a Beech 18 with a heater that worked when it felt like it, and I finished as a captain on the wide body out of the FedEx hub at Memphis International, which, for those who do not know, is the largest cargo operation of its kind on Earth. Nights, mostly. That is the freight world. The passengers sleep, and we move the country while they do it. I retired in 2011 at 56, with a good pension, a paid-off 5-bedroom in Cordova, and a wife I had been married to for 31 years. I want to tell you about one night, because you are going to need it later. March of 1997, I was a first officer then, on the DC-10, out of Anchorage with a full load of freight and weather across the whole Gulf of Alaska. About 40 minutes out, we lost a hydraulic system, and then, in a way that is not supposed to happen and did anyway, we started losing quantity in a second one. The captain was a man named Gus Hargrove, 61 years old, from Tupelo, and he had a voice like a man reading a menu. There is a specific feeling in a cockpit when things go bad, and it is not panic. It is the opposite. It is a narrowing. Everything unnecessary falls off the table, and you are left with the airplane, the checklist, and the man next to you. We ran it. We got the airplane on the ground at Anchorage and weather at minimums with degraded flight controls, and neither one of us raised his voice one time in 26 minutes. Afterward, in the van to the hotel, Gus said the only thing he ever said to me about it. He said, "Curtis, most men think courage is loud. It is not. It is just doing the next correct item on the list while your hands want to do something else." I have run that sentence through my head about 4,000 times since. 28 years after that night, a woman standing at the foot of my bed told a hospital employee that I got agitated in the afternoons, and there was not one thing on any checklist in the world that I could do about it. There is a phrase every pilot learns in his first 100 hours: aviate, navigate, communicate. In an emergency, in that order. Fly the airplane first. Figure out where you are going second. Talk to somebody about it last. It is the single most useful sentence anybody ever taught me, and it has kept me calm in weather, over the Rockies, that would put a normal man on the floor of the cockpit. I mention it now because I want you to see the shape of my failure clearly. For 30 years with my son, I ran that checklist exactly backward. I communicated. I wrote checks. I sent money. I signed for things. I never once flew the airplane. Adele and I met in 1978 in Orange Mound. She taught 3rd grade for 34 years at the same school, and there are grown men in this city who still call her Mrs. Vaughn when they see me at the grocery store. Before Damon, there was a boy we lost. He was born too early in the spring of 1981, and he lived 2 days at what is now Regional 1, and we named him Andre, and we buried him at New Park Cemetery in a box that a grown man could carry under one arm. Adele was never the same about children after that. I do not say that as a criticism. I say it as a fact, and it is the fact that explains my entire life. Damon came 3 years later, healthy, 9 pounds, screaming. And from the day we brought that boy home, my wife could not stand to see him unhappy. Could not stand it the way parents say it. Could not physically tolerate it. It went into her chest and squeezed, so Damon did not hear the word no very often, and when he did hear it, it was almost always from me, and I was home 11 days a month. That is the peace I have to own. I was gone. I was in Anchorage and Cologne and Subic Bay, and I called every night I could, and I missed a great deal. And when I did come home and I tried to hold a line, no, he does not get the car. No, he is not too sick for school. No, he broke it. He pays for it. Adele would wait until I left again, and quietly undo it. Every time. She was not being disloyal. She was being terrified. Somewhere in her, every consequence that landed on that boy was a small rehearsal of losing him, and she could not do it. We fought about it maybe 6 times in 31 years. The last one was in 2004, in the kitchen, and she said something I have never forgotten. She said, "Curtis, you get to be the good guy for 11 days. I am here for the other 350. You do not know what it costs." She was right. That ended the argument permanently, and I let it end. There was one afternoon in 1998 that I think about more than any other, because it was the whole thing in miniature, and I watched it happen and did nothing. Damon was 14. He and another boy took a neighbor's push mower out of an open garage on our street and used it, and then left it out in the rain in a vacant lot for 2 days, until the man came looking for it. I was home. That was the unusual part. I was actually home when it happened. I made him go across the street and knock on that man's door and apologize. Then I told him he was going to work it off, that he would cut that man's grass every 2 weeks for the rest of the summer, and cut ours, and that I would take the cost of the ruined mower out of the money he had saved for a bicycle. He cried. He was 14, and he cried like he was 7, and he told me I was ruining his summer, and I held the line. I felt good about it. I remember thinking, that is what a father is for. I flew out that Thursday for 6 days. When I got back, the neighbor had a brand new mower in his garage, and Damon still had his bicycle money, and my wife told me she had handled it, and that there was no reason for a 14-year-old to be humiliated on a whole street over a mistake. And I said, "Adele, that was the point." And she said, "The point of what? Making him feel small?" I did not have an answer for that. I have one now, 27 years later, and it is. The point is that a boy who never once feels small will grow into a man who cannot imagine that anything is too big for someone else to fix. But I did not have it then. I had a trip to Osaka in 11 hours and a wife who had buried a son, and I let it go, and I went to bed. That is the pattern. That is all of it. Repeat that scene about 200 times across 20 years, with the stakes going up each time, and you arrive precisely where I arrived, a 69-year-old man on the floor of his own kitchen. So Damon grew up understanding, all the way down, that his father was a man who provided things from a distance, and that consequences were negotiable. He was not a bad kid. I need to say that clearly, because the version of this story where he was born rotten is not true. He was funny and charming and generous with his friends. He simply never once in his life had to sit in the result of anything he did. Community college, 2 years, no degree. A mortgage brokerage that did well in 2006 and evaporated in 2008. Then medical device sales. Then a restaurant with a partner, which I put $41,000 into and never saw again. Then commercial real estate. Then a solar franchise. I counted it up once, sitting at my kitchen table after his mother died, on the back of an envelope, the way I used to run fuel numbers. Between 2003 and 2022, I gave my son somewhere in the neighborhood of $230,000. Not $1 of it was a loan, in practice. Every one of them was called a loan at the time. He married Marisa in 2014. She is sharp, she is organized, and she is, in her own way, the most honest person in this story, because she never pretended to like me. There was no performance to see through. She looked at my house and my pension and my 32 years and made an assessment early, and she stuck to it. Their son, my grandson, is Xavier. Everybody calls him Zay. He is 19 now, a sophomore at the University of Memphis, and I am going to be talking about him later, so hold on to him. Adele died in November of 2021. Pancreatic. 9 weeks from the diagnosis to the funeral at Mississippi Boulevard, and I have never in my life been through anything like those 9 weeks, including 2 engine failures and a hydraulic loss over the North Atlantic. And here is the thing about grief that nobody warns you about. It does not just take the person. It takes your ability to hold a line, because every line you ever held, you held with them. For 20 years, when I said no to Damon, Adele undid it. After she died, I could not say no at all, because saying no felt like arguing with a dead woman. It felt like winning an argument she was no longer there to have. Every time I opened my mouth to refuse my son something, I heard her voice from that kitchen in 2004, and I closed it. That is how they got in the house. It was the spring of 2023. Damon called on a Sunday and asked if he could come by, and he came alone, which should have told me something. The solar franchise had gone under. They were 4 months behind on the lease in Bartlett, and the landlord had filed. Maurice's hours had been cut. Zay was a senior in high school, with a college deposit due. He asked for 6 months. The house has 5 bedrooms. I had been living in it alone for 18 months, and I will admit to you, rattling around in it. I ate standing up at the counter. I had stopped using the dining room entirely. There were rooms in that house I had not walked into since the funeral. I said yes in under a minute. Not because he pressured me. He barely had to ask. I said yes because I was 68 years old, alone in a 5-bedroom house in Cordova, and my son was offering to fill it. We agreed on 6 months. We agreed they would cover the utilities. We agreed, and I remember this specifically, because it was the one thing I was firm on, that it was my house and they were guests. They moved in on the first Saturday of April 2023. I helped carry boxes. It was one of the better days I had had that year. They were still there 31 months later when I had the stroke. The takeover was so slow that I could not point to a day it happened. That is how these things work. Nobody stages a coup. They just rearrange the furniture, one piece at a time, until you are living in somebody else's house. The first 6 months were genuinely good. Marisa cooked. Zay was around. And that boy and I got closer that year than we had in his entire childhood. Damon and I watched the Grizzlies. For a while, I thought the whole thing had been a blessing in disguise. Then the 6 months came and went, and nobody mentioned it, and I did not bring it up, because bringing it up would have meant saying a version of the word no. Month 9, Marisa repainted the den. She did not ask. I came back from the barber shop on Germantown Parkway, and the den was gray, and my flying photographs were in a box in the garage. 32 years of aircraft, cruise, a picture of me and Adele at my retirement dinner, in a box, in the garage, wrapped in a bedsheet. I did not say anything. She had done the work herself, and she had done it well, and she said it looked so much brighter, and it did, and what kind of man argues about paint? Month 14, they took the master bedroom. That one I need to explain, because it sounds worse than the conversation felt at the time. Damon came to me and said his back was in bad shape and the guest room bed was killing him, and the master had the big bathroom, and would I mind swapping? And I said yes, because I was sleeping in the room I had shared with Adele, and I hated every night of it anyway, so I moved into my own guest room. 69 years old, in the house I bought in 1994, in the room where visitors sleep. Month 20, the thermostat. Marisa is cold-natured, and I run hot, and the arguing over the thermostat ended when Damon put a lock cover on it, a plastic box with a key, in my house. On the wall my wife picked. Month 24, they had people over for Marisa's birthday, about 20 people, and I came out of the guest room and I did not recognize anybody, and a woman I had never met asked me if I was Damon's father, and when I said yes, she said, "Oh, that is so nice that they let you stay here, that they let me stay here." I went back to my room and shut the door and sat on the end of that bed for a long time. Now understand, I could have ended it any day. It was my name on the deed. It was my house, free and clear since 2009. All I had to do was say one sentence. I never said it. And I have had a lot of hours since to think about why. And the honest answer is not just Adele. It is that at some point, being a guest in my own house started to feel less lonely than being the owner of an empty one. They had made me smaller, but they had also made me not alone. And at 69, that is a trade a man will make without ever admitting to himself that he is making it. The stroke was on a Tuesday in October of 2025 at about 6:10 in the morning. I was standing at the kitchen counter making coffee, and my right hand stopped taking instructions. That is exactly what it felt like. Not pain, not weakness. The hand simply stopped acknowledging the request. I watched the cup go over on the counter and I remember thinking, with perfect clarity, that is not right. And then the right side of my face went slack, and my leg went out from under me, and I was on the floor of my own kitchen looking at the underside of the cabinets. I was conscious the entire time. That is the cruelty of it. I could hear Marisa come down the stairs. I could hear her say my name twice, and then shout for Damon. I could hear the 911 operator's voice on speaker. I could not tell them a single thing. Left middle cerebral artery, ischemic. They took me to Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis, which has a comprehensive stroke center, and I want to be clear that the medical care I received in that building was excellent from the first minute to the last. The people who worked on me did everything right. What I came out with was right-sided weakness, which came back over months, and expressive aphasia, which did not. Expressive aphasia is a specific and particular hell. My comprehension was almost entirely intact. I understood every conversation held in my presence for 11 weeks. I could read. I knew who I was, where I was, what year it was, what the stakes were. I simply could not get words out. The machinery that assembles language into speech was damaged. I would reach for a word and find nothing, or find the wrong word entirely, or find a sound. I could sometimes manage yes and no in the early weeks, but unreliably, and here is the part that ruined me. Under stress, the reliability got worse. So the moments I most needed the word were exactly the moments I could not produce it. People assume that a man who cannot talk cannot think. Every single person in that building except 3 treated me like I was still in there. Almost every visitor treated me like furniture. By day 4, my son and daughter-in-law were discussing my life in the third person while I watched. The discharge conversation happened on day 9. The discharge planner, a young woman named Alexis, who was doing her job properly with the information she had, was working through options for a man with a dense aphasia and right-sided weakness who would need supervision, and Marisa told her there was no one at home. That was a lie, and it was a specific, load-bearing lie. My insurance had already authorized home health. There was a home health agency in Bartlett with an intake started. My neighbor Roosevelt Tate, who I have known for 29 years, had a key to my house, and had already told Damon he would check on me daily. Marisa told that discharge planner that the family both worked full-time, that the home was not safe, and that they had discussed it and felt strongly about skilled nursing. I made a sound. I want that on the record. I did make a sound. Everyone in the room turned and looked at me, and I could see Alexis genuinely trying to read my face, and I could feel my mouth working, and the only thing that came out was a vowel. And Marisa said, "He gets agitated in the afternoons." That sentence went into me like a knife going into a seat cushion. Because it was medically plausible, and it was said with concern, and it explained away everything I might do for the rest of the conversation. They put me in inpatient rehab for 3 weeks first, which was medically correct and which, it turned out, saved me, because 3 weeks bought me time. The paperwork came on day 11. Damon brought a folder. He sat on the edge of the bed, and he was warm about it, and he said there was some hospital paperwork and some insurance paperwork, and that with me not being able to talk on the phone, he needed to be able to handle things. He put a pen in my left hand, which was the working one, and he guided it. There were probably 9 documents. 6 of them were exactly what he said they were. HIPAA authorizations, insurance forms, a consent. 2 of them were not. One was a durable power of attorney, general and immediate, naming Damon Vaughn as my attorney-in-fact, with full authority over my property and finances. The other was a healthcare surrogacy document. I did not know what I was signing. That is the whole thing. I want to be precise about it, because it matters legally, and it mattered later. I was not tricked into signing a fake. I was handed real documents by my own son, at a moment when I could not read a dense page under stress, and could not ask a single question. I want to be fair about one more thing. I did try. On the 4th page, something caught my eye. I do not know what. A word, the density of the paragraph, the fact that there was a notary block at the bottom, and I stopped, and I put the pen down, and I made a sound, and I looked at him. And Damon said, "It's insurance stuff, Pop." I made the sound again. I got my left hand on the edge of the folder, and I pulled it about an inch toward me, which is the closest thing to an objection that was available to me on that day. And my son said gently, "The way you would talk to a child who is tired. I know it's a lot. We're almost done." And he moved the folder back and put the pen in my hand. That is all it took, 12 seconds. That was the entire resistance I was capable of mounting, and a man who did not want to see it did not see it. I signed my name 11 times with my left hand. "It looked like a child's writing," he said. "Thanks, Pop." He kissed the top of my head. He had not kissed my head since he was about 9 years old. 6 days after that, using that power of attorney, Damon and Marisa executed a quitclaim deed, transferring the house at Cordova from Curtis L. Vaughn to Damon and Marisa Vaughn, husband and wife. They filed it with the Shelby County Register of Deeds on a Thursday morning while I was in speech therapy, trying and failing to name a picture of a comb. Rehab was where I met the three people who treated me like a man. The first was my speech-language pathologist, a woman named Delphine Arsenault, who is the reason I can tell you this story at all. She never once talked over me. She never once talked louder at me, which people do, as though aphasia were deafness. She sat down at my eye level, and she said, "On the first day, Mr. Vaughn, I know you are in there. My job is to build you a road out. I want to describe one session, because people hear the word therapy and picture something gentle." She held up a card with a photograph of a comb on it. I knew it was a comb. I knew what a comb was for, what it was made of. That mine was in the second drawer of the bathroom at home on the left side. I opened my mouth and said, "Table." I knew it was wrong the instant it left me. That is the specific torture of aphasia. You are fully aware you have produced the wrong thing. You hear yourself say table about a comb, and there is nothing at all wrong with your judgment. So you get to sit there and evaluate your own failure in real time. I tried again. I said table 14 times. I counted 14 times. My brain reached for comb and came back with table. And on the 12th, I put my working hand flat on that table, and I hit it hard once, which is the only time in 71 years I have ever done anything like that. Delphine did not react at all. She waited. Then she put the card down and she said, "Mr. Vaughn, what did you fly?" And out of my mouth, clean and immediate, came DC-10. Neither one of us moved for a second. She said, "There it is. It is not gone. It is behind a door, and we are going to find the doors that open." Then she made me say it 11 more times, and by the end of that session I could produce DC-10 on demand, and I could not produce comb at all, and she told me that was normal, and that language is not a warehouse. It is a city, and a stroke does not empty the city. It closes streets. I went back to my room that night and thought about the fact that my brain had held onto an aircraft type from 1997 and lost a grooming implement I had used that morning. The second was Roosevelt Tate from across the street, who drove out to the rehab facility 11 times and never brought a single piece of paperwork. He would sit and talk about nothing for an hour. He talked about the grizzlies and about a dog on our street that gets loose. He asked me questions he did not need answered. Once, near the end, he said, "Curtis, blink twice if these people are handling your business right." And I blinked twice, because I was not sure, and because I was ashamed. He said, "All right," and he let it go. And I have thought about that a lot, that he asked, when nobody else did. The third was Zay. My grandson came every Sunday, 19 years old, and he would sit in that room with his laptop doing homework, just so the room was not empty. He talked to me the way you talk to a person. He complained about a professor. He showed me pictures of a car he wanted, and on the third Sunday in November he stopped in the middle of a sentence, and he looked at the door, and he said quietly, "Granddad, did you know they're not taking you home?" I looked at him. He said they toured a place in Whitehaven. "Mom's already got your bedroom cleared out. They're calling it a memory care place, but you don't have." And he stopped, because he did not have the words either, and he was 19, and he was betraying his own parents in a rehab room. I got my hand on his wrist. My left hand, the one that worked. I squeezed it hard, and I looked at him, and I put everything I had into my face, and that boy understood me. He said, okay, I've got you. I am going to say something plainly, and then I will move on." That 19-year-old was the only person in my bloodline who did the right thing when the right thing was expensive. He knew what it would cost him at home. He did it anyway. Zay is the reason I am not in a facility in Whitehaven right now. Here is what he did, and none of it was dramatic. He called the home health agency in Bartlett himself and confirmed the authorization was still active, and he gave them my discharge date, which his mother had not. He called Roosevelt Tate and told him, and he texted a photograph of the paperwork folder his father kept on the kitchen counter, which is how I learned, 3 days before discharge, that there was a power of attorney with my name on it. I went home on a Thursday in early December, not to Whitehaven, home to Cordova, to my own guest room, because the discharge planner had a documented home health authorization and a named neighbor with a key and a grandson on the phone saying the family absolutely could accommodate him. Marisa was furious. She hid it well in front of the discharge nurse. But I watched her face when they wheeled me through my own front door, and I have seen a lot of weather in 32 years, and I knew exactly what was coming. Wanda Boyd came 4 days a week. She was 58 years old, a home health nurse for 26 years, built like she could carry me if she had to, and she did not put up with one single thing. Wanda was the second person after Delphine who talked to me instead of about me. On her first visit, she stood in the doorway of my guest room, looked at the room, looked at the rest of the house, and asked me one question. "Mr. Vaughn, is this your room?" I did not answer. I could not. But she watched my face, and she wrote something in her tablet. That is the thing about Wanda Boyd that changed my life, and she did not know she was doing it. She charted everything. 26 years of home health had taught that woman to document like a court reporter. Every visit, she wrote down my orientation, my comprehension, my ability to follow multi-step commands, my participation in care decisions. She wrote down that the patient nodded appropriately to yes and no questions about his own care. She wrote down that the patient indicated preferences regarding meals and medication timing. She wrote down, on the 6th visit, that the patient became distressed when family discussed relocation in his presence, and that patient's distress resolved when reassured he would remain in the home. 6 weeks of clinical documentation by a licensed RN, establishing that Curtis Vaughn understood what was happening to him. That charting is what saved my house. Not a speech, not a confrontation, a nurse doing her paperwork properly. I want to talk about my son, and I want to do it fairly. Damon did not wake up one morning and decide to rob his father. What happened is smaller and more ordinary, and much more common than people think. He had been living in my house rent-free for 2.5 years. In his mind, and he said this out loud later, so I am not guessing, the house was already effectively theirs. They were maintaining it, they were caring for me. He was my only child, and it was coming to him anyway. The stroke did not create the idea. It accelerated a timeline he had already been running in his head. And once he had convinced himself of that, the power of attorney was not theft, it was paperwork. It was getting ahead of an inevitability. That is how people talk themselves into things, not by deciding to be evil, but by deciding the outcome was already true, and they are simply processing it early. Marisa was more direct and, in a way, more honest. She had a plan, and the plan made sense to her. Sell the Cordova house. 5 bedrooms, no mortgage. A good market. Buy something smaller in Collierville. Put the difference towards Zay's tuition and their own debt. And place me somewhere with 24-hour care, she said later, in my own kitchen. It was the responsible thing. You cannot manage that house. She genuinely believed it. That is what made her dangerous. She was not lying to me. She was reporting a conclusion she had already reached and treating my objection as a symptom. My first word came back on the 11th of January. I had been in outpatient speech therapy 3 times a week since December. Delphine had me on a program, melodic intonation, picture cards, scripts. It is slow, unglamorous, deeply humiliating work. A 69-year-old man who commanded a wide-body aircraft, sitting at a table, naming a picture of a spoon, and getting it wrong. Some days I got nothing. Some days I got a sound. That morning at breakfast, in my own kitchen, Marisa was on the phone with a realtor. She did not lower her voice, because there was no reason to lower her voice in front of me. She was describing my house. 5 bedrooms, 2.5 bath, corner lot, and she used the phrase, "We're looking at a spring listing." And Damon was at the counter with his back to me, and he said, "Just handle it, babe." And something in my chest opened up, and my mouth opened, and I heard my own voice say, very clearly, "No." The whole kitchen stopped. Marisa turned around with the phone still at her ear. Damon actually dropped a spoon. And I said it again because it was there. Because for the first time in 11 weeks, a word had come when I called it. No. I want you to understand what happened to me in that moment. Because it was not triumph. I sat at that table, and I started to cry. And I do not cry. And my son thought I was upset about the house. I was not crying about the house. Out of every word in the English language, the one my brain gave back to me first was the one word I had never once been able to say to that boy in 41 years. Not when he was 9 and Adele overrode me. Not at 19 with the car. Not at 28 with the restaurant. Not at 41 when he asked for 6 months and stayed 31. I had to have a stroke to say no to my son. Delphine told me later, gently, that the words that return first are usually the ones most deeply embedded, the automatic, high-frequency, emotionally weighted ones. She said no is extremely common. She said it was neurology, not poetry. I have decided to believe both things at once. If you have made it this far with me, do me a favor and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. And tell me honestly, have you ever kept quiet with your own family for so long that speaking up started to feel impossible? Hit that like button and stay with me. Because the word came back, and the very next thing I did with my voice was pick up a telephone. Speech came back unevenly after that. single words in January, short phrases by early February. By the end of February, I could get through a sentence if I was calm and unhurried, and I could not get through one at all if I was rushed or upset, which is a limitation I still have on bad days. I did 3 things, in order: aviate, navigate, communicate. Fly the airplane first. The first thing was Wanda. On a Tuesday, I asked her, slowly, in pieces, whether she would print her visit notes for me. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "Mr. Vaughn, I have been waiting 8 weeks for somebody in this house to ask me a question like that." The second was Delphine. I asked her whether there was a way to prove, on paper, that I was competent. She referred me to my neurologist, and in the last week of February, I underwent a formal capacity evaluation, cognitive testing adapted for aphasia, which is a real specialty, because the standard tests are all verbal and would fail a man who cannot speak regardless of his mind. I passed everything. The letter said that Curtis Vaughn demonstrates intact decision-making capacity regarding financial and personal affairs, with expressive language impairment that does not affect comprehension or judgment. The third was a lawyer. Roosevelt drove me. Her name is Elaine Rojas, elder law, an office off Poplar, and she is about my age, and reads faster than anybody I have ever met. She read the capacity letter, she read Wanda's charting, she pulled the deed record from the Register of Deeds while I sat there, and I watched her eyebrows go up about a quarter inch, which from her is the equivalent of shouting. She explained it to me slowly and without a single wasted word, which I appreciated more than I can tell you, because most people had started talking to me like I was 4. The power of attorney was probably valid on its face. Fighting the signing itself would be a long, expensive, uncertain battle over what I understood on day 11. But she said we did not need to fight that, because an attorney in fact is a fiduciary. He is legally required to act in the sole interest of the person who appointed him. And when a man holding a power of attorney uses it to transfer his father's house to himself and his own wife for no consideration, that is self-dealing, and it is about as clean a breach of fiduciary duty as exists, which makes the transfer voidable. She said, "Mr. Vaughn, they did not steal your house. They made a paperwork error that a first-year associate could unwind. The problem is not whether we get it back. The problem is how long it takes, and where you sleep while it happens." On the 4th of March, she filed to revoke the power of attorney, served notice, and filed suit to void the deed. Damon found out on a Thursday afternoon and came into my room without knocking, holding the papers, and asked me what I thought I was doing. I could speak by then. Not fast, but I could speak. I told him it was my house. He said the house was going to be his anyway, and that he had been taking care of me for months, and did I have any idea what that had cost them? And I asked him how much. He said, "What?" I said, "How much have you spent on me?" And he could not answer, because the number was 0. My insurance covered the home health, my pension paid the taxes, and the insurance on the house they were living in for free. He had not spent $1. He stood there for a while, and then he said the thing that told me exactly who I had raised. He said, "Pop, do you know how this looks? People are going to think we did something. Not, I am sorry. Not, I was wrong. How it looks." They did not move out. That is what most people do not expect. They dug in, because Marisa had gotten a second opinion from an attorney who told her, correctly, that they could not be removed instantly, and because at that point they genuinely had nowhere to go. They had given up their apartment 2.5 years earlier, and their credit would not carry a lease. So I had to evict my own son from my own house. Elaine walked me through it, and I wrote the dates on an index card and put it on the wall by my bed, the way I used to write down a departure sequence. Because the deed was voidable, and they were occupying without a lease, we proceeded on the eviction track. 30 days written notice to terminate the tenancy at will. If they did not go, a detainer warrant filed in Shelby County General Sessions. Then a hearing. Then, if we prevailed, a 10-day window in which they could appeal. Then, and only then, a writ of possession and a deputy. Elaine told me it would take somewhere between 2 and 4 months, and that anyone who promised faster was lying to me. The notice went out on the 11th of March. The hearing was set for the 22nd of April. That 6 weeks was the strangest stretch of my life. I lived in a guest room in my own house, down the hall from 2 people I was suing, and we shared a kitchen. Nobody screamed. That is the part I did not expect. It was quieter and colder than screaming. Marisa stopped speaking to me entirely, not one word for 6 weeks, in a house where we passed each other 4 times a day. Damon would say good morning and nothing else. I will give you 3 details from those 6 weeks and then I will move on. The first is that they stopped buying groceries for me. Not dramatically, they simply stopped including me. For 31 months, Marisa had cooked for 3 or 4, and then one evening in March I came out at 7, and there were 2 plates on the counter, and nothing else, and that was how it stayed. Wanda started bringing me things. Roosevelt started bringing me things. A 71-year-old man in his own kitchen, eating a sandwich a neighbor brought him. The second is the mail. Somebody was taking my mail off the counter. I could not prove it, and I still cannot. But a statement I was expecting did not arrive, and after that, I had Elaine's office send everything to Roosevelt's address across the street, which is a thing I never imagined doing in my life. The third is the one that told me it was really over. About 3 weeks in, Marisa's mother came to visit from Jackson. I heard the front door, and I heard the two of them in the kitchen, and I stayed in my room, because that is what I did in those weeks. And I heard Marisa's mother say, "Where is Mr. Vaughn? Is he all right?" And Marisa said, "He is resting. He is not really himself since the stroke. He is not really himself." I was sitting on the end of that bed with a capacity letter from a board-certified neurologist in a folder on the nightstand, listening to a woman tell her own mother that I was not really in there. I understood something in that moment that I have not been able to shake. She was not lying to her mother. She had genuinely reorganized me in her mind into a person who did not fully count anymore. And once you have done that to somebody, everything else is easy. You are not stealing from a man. You are managing an estate. Wanda came 4 days a week and did not pretend she did not notice. She started staying longer. She started coming on days she was not scheduled. When I told her she did not have to do that, she said, "I know I do not have to." Roosevelt started coming over in the evenings to watch the game. He would let himself in with his key and sit down in my den, the gray one, with my photographs still in the garage, and nobody said a thing to him, because Roosevelt Tate is 6'4" and was a deputy for 22 years. And Zay came home from campus every Sunday, which caused a war in that house that I only heard the edges of. The hearing lasted about 20 minutes. I had a capacity letter from a neurologist. I had 6 weeks of contemporaneous clinical documentation from a licensed RN, establishing my comprehension. I had a deed record showing an attorney in fact transferring property to himself and his spouse for no consideration. Their attorney did not have much to work with. He argued that the family had acted in good faith to protect an incapacitated relative, which was the only argument available to him, and it did not survive the timeline, because the transfer had happened 6 days after the signing, and 4 months before anyone had bothered to obtain a capacity assessment. Elaine asked me whether I wanted to speak. She said I did not have to, that the documents did the work, and that if my speech failed under pressure, it would not hurt us. I said I wanted to. I stood up, and my son was 11 feet away from me, and I got out 4 sentences. It took me close to 2 minutes to say 4 sentences. Nobody rushed me. The judge waited. I said, "I bought that house in 1994. My wife died in that house. My son has lived in it free for 2.5 years. I would like to go home, that is all." I had planned more, and I could not get to it, and I did not need to. The deed was voided. Possession was awarded to me. They did not appeal. The 10 days ran out on the 2nd of May. They left on the 6th, 4 days after the deadline, with a deputy scheduled for the following morning. I did not watch. Roosevelt sat with me in his kitchen across the street for 3 hours, and we watched a movie. Neither of us was following. When I came back, the house was empty, and the master bedroom closet doors were open, and there was a plastic lockbox still bolted over the thermostat. Roosevelt got a screwdriver out of his truck and took it off the wall for me, and then he went out to my garage and carried in a box wrapped in a bed sheet, and we spent the rest of that evening hanging 32 years of airplanes back on the wall of my den. Here is what happened to them, and I want to be careful with this part, because I take absolutely no pleasure in it. The thing Marisa had not accounted for was the money Damon had already spent against the house. In February of 2026, while the deed was in their names, my son took out a home equity line of credit against my property, $65,000. He used about 30 of it to clear their consumer debt and put a deposit down on a place in Collierville, and he spent some of the rest on things I do not know about. When the deed was voided, the lender's lien did not simply evaporate. That got sorted out through the litigation, and I am not going to bore you with the mechanics. But the short version is that the money he drew stayed his problem. He had spent $30-odd thousand of borrowed money that was now unsecured and entirely, personally his. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment off Sycamore View. Damon got on with a fleet services company doing sales, which is honest work, and which, from what I hear, he is reasonably good at. Marisa left him in November. I do not celebrate that. There is a version of a man who would, and I have worked hard not to be him. She left because the plan failed, and because she had married a picture of a future that never materialized, and I have some sympathy for her that I did not expect to have. She was hard and she was wrong, and she tried to take my home. She also spent 11 years attached to a man who had been taught by his mother and me that things would always be handled by somebody else. We built that. Adele and I built that, and then Marissa married it, and then it came apart on her. Zay stayed with me for the summer of 2026. That was not a rescue. He is 19, and he needed a place near campus, and I have 5 bedrooms. He took the one at the back. He paid me $40 a week, because he insisted, and I took it, because a man who will not let a young person pay his way is not helping him. That summer was the best 3 months I have had since Adele died. He worked at a warehouse near the airport and came home smelling like cardboard, and we ate dinner at the dining room table, which I had not used since 2021. He asked me about flying, really asked, the way you ask when you actually want to know, and I told him things I had not told anybody in 30 years. Weather over Greenland, a hydraulic failure into Anchorage in 1997, the specific sound a wide-body makes at rotation. He is studying supply chain management now. He says it is because of Memphis and the hub. I suspect it is at least partly because of me, and I have not asked. Because there are things you do not put a man on the spot about. He asked me once, that summer, whether I was angry at his parents. He asked it carefully, the way you ask a question you have been carrying for a while. I told him the truth, which is that I was angry for about 4 months, and that it burned itself out somewhere around the hearing, and that what replaced it was worse and more useful, which is understanding exactly how it happened, and knowing that I had a hand in building it. And he said, "That's not on you, Granddad." And I said, "Some of it is, and you need to hear me say that, because you are going to have children one day, and the most expensive thing I ever did to your father was make his life too easy." He did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "You never made mine easy." I said, "No, I did not have the chance to. That may have been the best thing that ever happened to you." I told him one night at that table that what he did in that rehab room was the bravest thing anybody in our family has done in my lifetime. And he said, "I just told the truth, Granddad." And I said, "I know, that is what I said." Damon came back in September. He asked to meet somewhere neutral, and we met at a place on Union, and he had lost about 20 pounds, and looked like a man who had been sleeping badly for a year. He apologized. It took him a while to get to it, and it came out sideways, and about a third of it was still explanation rather than apology. But it was real. He said he had convinced himself it was already his. He said it out loud, which took something. And then he said, "I don't expect anything. I just don't want to be somebody who doesn't talk to his father." Now here is what I did, and I have had to explain it to Roosevelt, to Wanda, and to my own grandson, all of whom had opinions. I told him he could come to dinner on Sundays. That is all. Not the house, not the money, not the keys, not a room, not $1. Dinner, on Sundays, at the table. There is a thing in aviation about who occupies the left seat. The captain flies the airplane. Everybody else in that aircraft can be aboard, can be valued, can be family, but there is one seat, and there is one person responsible, and you do not hand it over because somebody feels entitled to it. My son has a seat on this aircraft. He is never getting back in the left seat. He knows that now, and I said it to him in those words, and being a Vaughn, he understood the metaphor. He has come to dinner most Sundays for about 10 months. It is careful. It is not what it was in 1998, and it never will be, but he shows up, and he brings something, and he does not ask me for anything, and last month he fixed the gate on my fence without being asked, and without mentioning it afterward. There was one Sunday in the spring that I will keep. Zay was there, and Wanda, and Damon, and we were at the dining room table, and my speech went out on me in the middle of a sentence, the way it still does when I get going too fast. I stopped. I could not get the rest of it. And in the old days, I mean the days before all of this, somebody would have finished the sentence for me. That is what people do. They mean it kindly. And it takes something from you every single time. Damon did not. He put his fork down and he waited. 20 seconds, maybe 30, which is a long time at a table. And when I got it out, he just nodded and answered the question. Afterward, at the sink, I told him I appreciated that. And he said he had read about it. He said he had read a whole thing about aphasia months ago, about how you are supposed to wait. Months ago. Which means he read it while he was still living in my house, still holding my power of attorney, still planning to sell the place out from under me. I have not worked out what to do with that. A man can look up how to be kind to his father and steal from him in the same week. People are not one thing. That is the most inconvenient fact I have learned in 71 years, and it has taken me most of them to accept it. That is more than I expected. It is less than I wanted. I have made my peace with it living in that gap. Wanda Boyd discharged me from home health in June of 2026. That was supposed to be the end of it. Her agency closed my chart. She came by anyway about 3 weeks later with a pan of something and said she was in the neighborhood, which was a lie because she lives in South Haven. We have been seeing each other for a little over a year now, slowly. Neither one of us is 25 and neither one of us is interested in pretending. She was widowed in 2019. She has 2 grown daughters and a granddaughter who calls me Mr. Curtis and cannot be talked out of it. She still charts everything. She has a notebook. I make fun of her for it constantly. I remind her, about once a month, that a stranger's paperwork is the only reason I own the roof over my head. And she says, every time, I was not a stranger. I was your nurse. Here is where things stand. I am 71. My right hand is about 90%. My speech is close to normal on a good day, and it falls apart when I am tired or upset, and I have stopped apologizing for that. The house is mine, free and clear, in my name alone, and Elaine Rojas has since redone every document I own. A new power of attorney with 2 people on it who have to agree, a proper healthcare directive, and a trust with real terms. She told me the single most dangerous document in America is a general power of attorney handed to one relative with no oversight, and that she has built half her practice on cleaning up after them. If you take one practical thing from this story, take that. I have my photographs back on the wall of my den. The den is still gray. I have decided I actually like it gray, which is the sort of thing that would have infuriated me 2 years ago. And here is what I understand now, that I did not understand for 40 years. I thought I was being a good father by never letting my son feel the weight of anything. Every check I wrote, every consequence I lifted, every no I swallowed, I thought that was love. It was not. It was me buying my way out of a discomfort I did not want to sit in, and then calling the purchase generosity. You cannot love the weight off a person. It does not transfer. All you can do is teach them that weight is somebody else's job, and then one day they will look at your house, and your bank account, and your body in a hospital bed, and they will see one more thing that is somebody else's job to hand them. I did that. Adele did it out of grief and fear, and God knows I understand why. And I did it out of guilt and distance and 32 years of not being home. Neither one of us meant a thing by it except love. But the boy who never once heard no became a man who could not hear it, and when I finally had to say it, I could not. So here is the last thing, and it is for whoever is out there right now writing another check they know they should not write. The word is not cruelty. I spent 40 years believing that no was the opposite of love, and it took losing my speech to understand that they are the same instrument. Every time you take a consequence off somebody's shoulders, you are telling them they are not strong enough to carry it. There is nothing kind in that. There never was. Say it while you still have your voice. That is all. Say it while you can still get the word out, and say it to their face, and let them be angry, and let them sit in it. Because the alternative is lying in a hospital bed at 69 years old, with the whole sentence assembled in your head, and nothing coming out but a sound. So tell me down in the comments, was I wrong to let my son back to the table? Roosevelt thinks I was. Wanda thinks I was right. My grandson has not told me what he thinks, and I have not asked. And tell me where you are watching from while you are down there. If this one reached you somewhere, hit that like button and subscribe, because I have another story coming, and I will see you on the next one.